Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is unwavering support in challenging times. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
It's the week ending Saturday the 20th of May, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the UK government unveiling measures to eliminate no-fault evictions in the private rental sector, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex being chased by New York paparazzi, and scientists predicting the world temperature is likely to break the 1.5 degrees centigrade warming threshold. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from the week's digital team, it's Sorcha Bradley. From Money Week, we have Guy Anker, and back from the International Affairs Journal, it's book reviews editor Mariana Vieira. Guy, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is investing in cryptocurrency really just a form of gambling?
Cryptocurrency market is extremely volatile compared to the broader stock market. So if you're someone who is concerned about taking on too much risk and can't stomach a lot of losses, it might not be the best option for you.
Market and personal finance reporter Jessica Menton speaking to the USA Today website. Guy, what's the story?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people heard about cryptocurrency because it's in the news a lot, the value of Bitcoin booming at certain times. And it's meant a lot of people have put their money into cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and there's others as well, but Bitcoin's the big one. However, lots of people are worried about the risks involved. And a group of MPs in the Treasury Select Committee this week have basically said it's akin to gambling.
Yes, this is on Wednesday. They published a report in which they said crypto should be treated like gambling, given it had, quote, no intrinsic value, high price volatility, and no discernible social good.
Yeah, and if we start to put some numbers behind that, it's so volatile. In the last 3 years or so, it's swung between $5,000 for one Bitcoin, this is, to $65,000 for one Bitcoin. It's currently trading just under about $30,000 as we record this, but these things move sometimes at the drop of a hat, which is part of the point they're making, that it's so volatile, people don't understand them. And the point about no intrinsic value, if you're investing in a company, you're buying a share of that company. You are literally buying a share of it. And hopefully, if they do well, earn some of the profits. If you're buying gold or you're buying art even, you've got an actual commodity, something physical that's yours. With art, it might be something beautiful to look at, of course. With gold, people like holding gold. There's lots of other things you can buy, of course. Investments tend to have a physical value, or you're buying a share of a company. Cryptocurrency, because it's digital currency in the cloud. We can't touch it. We can't feel it. Other than the price rising and falling as people trade it, doesn't really exist physically in the real world.
Okay. I mean, I understand the delineation, but what would this regulation actually look like then? I mean, briefly, because I want to bring in the other contributors as well, but what are they proposing by treating it like gambling?
So that they haven't really given any detail as to what it should look like. The point they're making is that they're starting at the very top, strategically looking at it and thinking, right, have we got this right? No, it's not really a form of investment. It's a form of gambling. They haven't gone any further than that. I must say, the Treasury doesn't agree with them. And as you'd probably expect, the crypto industry doesn't agree with them either.
How's it being regulated around the world, Mariana? Because it's all very well the UK coming up with a policy on this, but it's a global system, isn't it?
Yeah, so I think there's quite a bit of diversity. I was looking a little bit into this around the globe, and let's take this on sort of like a trip. Let's imagine we're just not sitting in our recording anymore. And I was looking at especially so Singapore has seen considers exchanges as being legal and has a friendlier position than its neighbors in terms of cryptocurrency. Curiously, they've taken on a lot of the Chinese providers after China had the 2021 crackdown. So in China, it is illegal to have and also to exchange. So it's like the way it is considered in law, it can be seen as currency, as property, and I think as goods, and then taxing sort of varies according to this. Australia and Japan are considered some of the most progressive in their regulatory climates. Japan is pretty curious since they had that 2018 coin check heist where the equivalent of $530 million in digital currency was just sort of stolen. So they do have some concerns, but they have some of the best ecosystems for cryptocurrency exchanges in the world. And then you have all sorts of different nuance and approaches to cryptocurrency regulation in Latin America. So within the sort of the region slash continent, Bolivia and Ecuador have sort of comprehensively banned cryptocurrencies. And then you have places like Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Venezuela, and Chile, where cryptocurrencies are actually accepted as payment in retail outlets.
Sorcha, you're a young person. Do you feel like you need to be protected from the risks of crypto? Because that's what seems to be belying this kind of paternalistic attitude from the Treasury Select Committee. I wonder if it's, young people unaware that they're gambling, or whether it's actually older people who are more likely to fall into a trap with this.
Anecdotally, the people that I know who have invested in cryptocurrency are young men in their mid-20s or 30s, and those sort of, as we know, are also the group that is vulnerable to gambling and the risks of gambling. And I do think, you can see a lot of parallels between investing in cryptocurrency and gambling. It's exciting. You could potentially win a huge, not win, but earn a huge amount of money through, well, exactly. It's the whole mentality around cryptocurrency and the whole language around it is often the same language we sort of use as we do with gambling.
And do those young men that have they been trapped in the same thing as you might expect from young men that are addicted to football, gambling, or any other kind of like sports-based or casino-based mobile gambling, where they're looking at their phone all the time to check the prize?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd say most of the young men I know who have invested can afford to invest in sort of cryptocurrency and sort of can afford to take the losses, but that might, that's probably says more about maybe my social circle than the wide general public. And I think there is a risk for all young men to sort of get drawn into this, constantly checking your phone, the excitement of the win or the losses if the market's moving up and down.
But to return to my original question then, do they need to be protected from it then? Like I take your point that there are people that probably are more vulnerable than your circle of friends, fine. But nonetheless, if they know what crypto is and they know what the risk is, does it need any more regulation? Aren't they quite aware of what they're doing?
I do think there needs to be more regulation. I think it is still a bit of, it's a new sort of industry. It's still kind of a bit of a Wild West attitude towards it. And I think, with any new technology and any new industry, as we learn more about it, we need to see, greater regulation in order to protect people from huge financial losses, potentially at a very young age, where that could affect them for the rest of their lives.
I mean, Guy, you've been reporting on, finance and personal finance for quite some time. Have you ever invested in crypto?
I have. But no, you know what? No, actually, I'm going to say no, I haven't. I've gambled in crypto.
Right.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I put the equivalent of about $300 in. I came back out of it with $250. So I only lost about 50. It got to about 500 at one point. It went down to about 200, and I ended up with about a $50 loss, which was fine. It was money I could afford to lose. I saw it as a bit of fun. And my view is, unless you really, really know the market, it's fine to put money in crypto, by the way. It's not a bad thing. But as long as you know that things can move very suddenly, as long as you understand that you probably don't understand it. I'm talking here to the 99.9% of people who don't understand it. There will, of course, be people that do.
Well, this is it, isn't it? I mean, and this is what Sorcha was hinting at. There are people out there who probably aren't being represented by this panel right now who can't afford to spend $300 on something and don't fully understand it, and don't fully understand that they don't understand it, and that's where the risk is.
As I said, as long as it's money you can afford to lose, there's nothing wrong with putting money into crypto, as long as you know the risks you're going in with. The problem we have, I think, and this is why I think we do need a form of regulation, is it's often portrayed as a get-rich-quick scheme. And that's problematic. That's very problematic, in fact. And, we've seen this week some gambling charities saying they've had people coming to them about cryptocurrency, which I'm not surprised to hear, because obviously, they've naturally made that link as well. So I think we do need that additional protection for all sorts of people. Of course, there's going to be people listening to this now who understand it inside out. And yes, it's an investment for them. But I'd even say, even if you know it inside out, I don't know how you can possibly be prepared for some of the fluctuations we've seen, having said that. But I just wanted to put the other side of the story across.
I just wanted to pick up on something that Guy was saying about how the cryptocurrency is sort of a bit of fun. And this really shows the difference between investing and gambling in terms of gambling. So, an investor will use sort of tools to diversify and mitigate their risks and decrease the chance for loss, as opposed to a gambler who is typically just all in, and that dictates the level of winning and losing. So, it's sort of like it's almost as if this change in mindset is useful because it really highlights how it's the strategy and the planning behind the asset, in this case the cryptocurrency, that decides whether you're gambling. So in a way, gambling is exciting, but investment, if it's done well, should be really boring.
Guy, you were talking about understanding the market, though. I mean, is it ever possible to understand the market? Do you understand the market?
No, and I'll be really honest with you about that. You ask me about complex things around pensions, investments, mortgages. I think I'll probably do a half decent job. With cryptocurrency, I have to put my hands up. I remember going to a conference a few years ago on crypto. It was half it was over my head because blockchains and cloud-based movements and the mathematics behind it. And people listening to this will say, "Oh, he should know his stuff. He's a personal finance journalist." I think most personal finance journalists don't know what crypto, and I think most people in the world don't really understand crypto. Of course, though, there will always be experts, but they're a significant minority. And I think this is an important point when we're looking at investing versus gambling. When you're investing, you have tools at your disposal. How is this company performing? What's their strategy? What's their management team like? How is this commodity performed? What do these 100 experts think might happen with this commodity? What's happening in Russia and Ukraine that might affect the price of this? There are clear tools at your disposal. You may still get it wrong, of course, and people may, of course, make investment losses, and some make catastrophic investment losses, but you're less likely to make those catastrophic investment losses, in my opinion, with normal investments than you are with cryptocurrency.
And just finally on this, I guess the government in this country, when it comes to technology, are often derided, aren't they? Either because, things they've put in place fall apart, or they seem to have a primitive understanding about the impact of things like social media. This feels like at least a good thing that in the Treasury Select Committee they are discussing cryptocurrency and how it should be regulated, no?
It's very positive in my view that this is coming up at this level because it needs this level of scrutiny. And interestingly, the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK, there's a paper on its website, it's only about 3 weeks old, and they're very clear when they say that we don't really have any powers at the moment to regulate cryptocurrency. Only when the government legislates can we. They can look at it from an anti-money laundering point of view and counter-terrorism point of view, just make sure the wrong people aren't using crypto to launder their cash. But there's no actual regulation of crypto at the moment in the UK. But what I would say is, while it's great that this is coming up, because it gets it in people's minds, just us having this conversation, it brings it to the fore. But even if we had regulation, I would say one thing, because it's a worldwide commodity, even if it was regulated in the UK, I still think bad uns could escape the regulation because they just go and set up somewhere else, and you just buy. You'd be sitting on your computer somewhere in Buckinghamshire, but you'd be buying from somewhere across the world. And even though there is regulation, it might not actually, impact your purchase.
Okay, Mariana, you're up next after this.
Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is unwavering support in challenging times. It's the expertise to try to minimize risk while maximizing opportunities. Can do is being right here for you through every eventuality. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
Okay, Mariana, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Gen Z says thank you next to Vice.
Vice was a really inspired me to get into the business. They were some of the forefront pioneers on YouTube, developing and finding stories, telling them in a way that I and many people my age and millions of people wanted to consume. I will absolutely never ever forget watching the Vice Guide to North Korea. I'd never seen anything like it. I think that came out in 2006 or 2007, and then watching some of their Libyan stuff, Liberia,
like a ride along with ISIS.
Yes,
I mean,
I remember that one too. The Syrian civil war coverage that they did. It was incredible.
The team on the podcast Breaking Points a couple of weeks ago discussing the downturn for Vice Media. Mariana, what's the story this week?
So this week, the company behind the websites Vice and Motherboard has filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in the US. It is set to be sold to a group of its lenders with some approved funding to keep the firm going through the bankruptcy process.
Okay, so it won't be the end of Vice as a brand then, but the company's being gutted out, is it? What's happened?
That's right. It will continue to operate during the bankruptcy process, and it is being framed as a strategy for long-term growth. However, the Vice Media Group, which was once valued at $5.7 billion in 2017, could be taken over for $225 million. And so, although the brand is continuing, earlier last month, Vice announced about 100 layoffs to its flagship TV program, Vice News Tonight. And so I think it's a bit uncertain what will happen to the brand in the future.
Okay, so why is this your story of the week then? And tell us a bit about Vice, give us a bit of context on why this matters.
I'm sure we're all aware of the phenomenon that is Vice, the fact that it operates in more than 30 countries, that it has 17 million subscribers on YouTube, and it's sort of this idea of all this potential that it had, all this rise. So it was founded in 1994 in Canada, and so the way it has been positioning itself as a youth targeting digital news, the fact that some of its stories are a bit controversial, as we heard on the audio. It's this idea of how it kept rising and rising, even despite lots of controversies around Me Too and sexual harassment. And all of a sudden, it seems to sort of just like be imploding from the inside.
Were you shocked by this, Sorcha, or were you expecting it? As Mariana said, we've been having some warning signals recently.
Yes and no. I think obviously everyone who works in media knows it's this one of our sort of existential problems is how to turn our readership or viewership into profit, into being able to keep our businesses afloat. And that is sort of an ongoing discussion in the media industry. But at the same time, when I was growing up, Vice was the place that you wanted to work for. It was the coolest media brand. It's what made everyone, sort of want to be a journalist. And it did have this huge appeal to young people, which I just don't think they've been able to sustain.
That's really interesting. So what's that? Is that because what's cool and trendy has shifted like trends do and they're no longer cool? Or is it because the medium's changed and, Vice.com isn't a destination, it relied on social media spreads? What's the reason, do you think?
Yeah, I sort of think it's kind of 10 years ago that sort of, gonzo journalism, where you have these young men going into war zones or exploring psychedelics in sort of journalistic fashion that seemed exciting and that seemed new. And I think actually, luckily, young people now sort of look back on some of that journalism and say, well, it was a lot of white men. It wasn't a very diverse newsroom. I think a lot of the time that meant they could struggle to get to grips with some of the nuances of these huge stories that they were trying to cover. Everyone's heard stories about the newsroom culture, which wasn't particularly welcoming to women. So I think their brand has slowly sort of become more toxic and less associated with some of the exciting journalism that they did do, which they definitely did do, and more kind of with their flaws, which I think have become more sort of apparent in the last few years, last 5 years.
And also maybe, Guy, their tone, their attitude, their outlook ended up, the good stuff, the stuff that resonated, ended up being swallowed up by everyone else. I mean, even at Money Week, which is a very different brand to Vice. Nonetheless, I bet even in the way that website and publication is run, there are techniques in terms of keeping viewers, in terms of framing stories, in terms of making things accessible, which were learned from the likes of Vice and BuzzFeed and Insider. There's not such a distinction anymore between the new media and the old.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of our influence is from Vice itself. Certainly not from the content. But I do wonder if sort of, to the point you just made, Sorcha, and is its edginess part of its downfall? Is that what advertisers want their name against? I'm speculating here when I say that. But we have seen advertisers pull away from certain brands that when it doesn't fit their brand ethos. So I wonder if there's two things at play here. A, has its nature become part of its downfall? But also, as we've heard already, it is difficult to make money in media. There's lots of successful companies, don't get me wrong, but lots of companies that have struggled. And unfortunately, we've seen a lot of layoffs. I mean, you see major national newspapers in the UK struggling. Every time you go to the Guardian, I'm not saying it's struggling, but it's asking for money certainly every time I go and read it, it wants my money. I don't have a problem with that.
Although that's been a big success for them, given the context of the last 10 years in Guardian finances, hasn't it? They're now seen as being stable.
No, I'm almost making that point. I don't have a problem with that. But it's because because of how difficult it has been, and media organisations have had to think of different ways. I can't remember how many years ago it was when the Sun and the Times first started putting their content behind a paywall. Or not all those paywalls have lasted. That's another way media companies have tried to make money. Some of them try to make money through e-commerce, where you actually click a link on the website, go away and buy or apply for whatever it is, and the media organization gets a kickback. And it's difficult for the likes of Vice to certainly monetize in the way I've just talked about through e-commerce, because not necessarily, it's not a commodity-based read. You're reading for general interest.
Well, also their approach to advertisers, Mariana, as I understand it, in large part, was come and work with us. Let's collaborate. Let's do something together. It wasn't just, we'll slap your brand on our video. They were trying to get more money by integrating products more fully into the experience. But as Guy was indicating, that relies on a certain kind of company that wants to be associated with that kind of tone and attitude. And maybe an organization like Vice that thinks it's really cool and doesn't have to try too hard.
I think that's a really good point, and it's also really interesting that as Vice grew and grew its membership or readership, and also wanted to keep growing its advertising appeal, you see this in the mid 2010s. You see this shift towards trying to do some more quote unquote serious journalism, and towards the late 2010s when they land an interview with Barack Obama and they're publishing reports on topics including the London riots. So you see it's both Vice and its main competitor at the time, BuzzFeed, who are trying to sort of engage more with the advertisers. And curiously, as part of like the wider concerns and anxieties within the media landscape, also this year BuzzFeed also shut down its news division and laid off 15% of its workforce. So at this point, it's tricky to tell whether this is something just exclusively internal to Vice's brand and appeal, or if it's a more of a wider thing within the industry.
And where do you think it's all shaking down, Sorcha, more broadly, with regard to this long conversation about how do you monetize audiences online? Because as Guy pointed out, there are so many different strategies in place. There's paywalls, there's donations, there's, hey, I'll give this away for free, but come and join my Substack. Where do you think this is going to land?
For me personally, I think, we do have to convince our audience that they have to pay for news if you want quality journalism and quality opinion, quality writing. Those are things that you do have to pay for. I think it is difficult because I think, as instinctually as journalists, you do want your stories out there, and it does sort of feel wrong to say that some people won't be able to have access to really important stories.
Although that is how it worked for 200 years in print, right?
Well, exactly. I think there's lots of things that we still need to work out on exactly how we do it. But there was a really interesting article actually in Press Gazette today, which I only glanced at, so apologies if I get some details wrong. But the editor of The Fence was saying sort of the Guardian's, I was going to say business model, but it's not a business model. The Guardian's practice of having all its news stories out there for free is actually sort of an existential threat to the rest of news media, because it's sort of reinforcing the idea that audiences can have news for free. And I don't know whether I totally agree with that, but I do think there has to be more kind of pushing of this idea that you do have to pay for journalism and good quality journalism if you want it to continue existing. I think that's like the real point. we're getting to this point where it's not sustainable, and we're not going to be able to have journalists, out in the field getting stories that are really important unless, we can pay them, and unless these kind of media companies can survive.
Well, what do you think, Mariana? You've been looking into this, for the last couple of days. You've seen lots of different justifications. What do you think is behind it, really?
The thing that kept coming back to my mind is the idea that, like, with a sort of generational shift, there are things that were okay in the early 2000s that are not necessarily as okay with younger generations at this point. And it makes me think a lot about Victoria's Secrets as well, and the Angel and so on. But the more I read into Vice, and the more I read into the founders of it, and they have this book from 2003 called The Vice Guide to Sex and Drugs and Rock and Roll. And in it, they talk about how they used the magazine at the time to get as a way to get laid, and they even got some orgies out of it. And it's sort of like this was appealing. Literally 20 years ago. I can't believe 2003 was 20 years ago. But a lot of it was sort of like they were very bold in their approach, and they were celebrated for it. And sometime in the last 2 decades, it's sort of there seems to be a change there. And the more you see, I think as Sorcha was saying, it was a dream place to work in. And suddenly you hear all these horror stories, especially for young women who've joined with such aspirations. And they're, even though in their responses, the owners or the people still in charge at the time had a lot of ownership of the problem, and they were sort of taking responsibility to address it. It's still like stacking disappointments on top of this brand, and it's like the question then becomes, how long can the brand survive when it's going through this?
I wonder as well, just finally, Sorcha, whether, because you can think of other examples of smaller media organizations that operate in a kind of boutique way. I'm thinking about like Tortoise, for example, where they are just doing news and features and stuff, but they're not valuing themselves like a tech organization. Isn't that it? Vice was behaving like, oh, we're going to get bought by Disney, we're going to get bought by Google, we're worth billions. Whereas actually, you could do a lot of their content with, 15 qualified journalists in a room being paid modestly and not behave like that.
It's hard to be both a media disruptor, quote unquote, and a legitimate news source. And I think you need to kind of be one or the other. And I think maybe that's where it went wrong. And also, Vice was doing a lot of extremely expensive journalism, sort of, more towards the end, where it was, sending journalists to war zones, etc. And I think it kind of ate itself with aspirations of grandeur, and maybe it should have stuck to its bread and butter and evolved, obviously, to still appeal to kind of, Gen Z, and no longer to sort of millennials who are, we're getting into our 30s and 40s now, and maintain that as its core brand rather than try to do both at once, which just never really worked.
Okay. Sorcha, you're finishing the show after this. Okay, Sorcha, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Do we really want to dress like Elon Musk and Rupert Murdoch?
Giving you my top celebrities that embody stealth wealth or quiet luxury, whichever term you'd prefer. Starting, of course, with none other than Morgan Stewart. To me, when I think about this, what we're now calling a trend, but is not a trend, it's definitely a lifestyle, I think about her. But let's go through a few others. Zoe Kravitz also comes to mind. Talked about this in her style evolution. She nails the effortless chic look. This outfit could cost $5 or $5,000. You'd have no idea.
Fashion TikToker Megan Ford in her video, Who is your stealth wealth / quiet luxury inspiration? Sorcha, if we had such a thing as the Paul Hollywood handshake on this show, you would have just earned it, because this is my favourite story of the year on the show so far. I love this, not least because it quotes the best TV show on telly. But tell me, what is stealth wealth?
Yes, so stealth wealth, or sometimes called quiet luxury, is sort of one of social media's biggest trends right now, or so some people claim. And it's inspired countless articles and think pieces, including in big name publications like the Wall Street Journal. And essentially what sort of its adherents suggest is that rich people, I was actually being a bit facetious earlier, kind of the icons of stealth wealth are more like Gwyneth Paltrow, or, as we were just saying, the characters in Succession like Kendall Roy or Shiv. They say that wealthy people don't dress in ostentatious clothing and labels, but they communicate their wealth quietly through lesser known but still extremely expensive brands like Loro Piana or The Row. Basically brands that those not in the know, non-wealthy people are unlikely to recognize.
I mean, there are just so many layers as to why Succession is the best show on TV, but this is, not being a fashionista myself, not something I'd considered, but once it was pointed out to me in the articles you forwarded through ahead of today's recording, I was like, oh yeah. It's true, isn't it? You can see on all those characters in Succession, and apologies to people who aren't watching it, I won't do any spoilers, but you can see in all those characters that they are wealthy by the way they dress, and yet they're not wearing ostentatious labels, they're not wearing logos. What kind of things are they wearing? What is quiet luxury?
It's nothing that is super imaginative, I would say, or super out there. It's a lot of basics. It's a lot of, things like blazers or even baseball caps, things and products that, unless you knew it was from a certain brand, there's no label on it, it's not recognizable, it's not in all the fashion magazines, you would have no idea that it was from a luxury brand unless, you're basically in the know and sort of in that inner circle.
Which sounds a little bit like kind of business casual, Guy. Theoretically, you'd think sort of monochrome colours, relatively dull things, not obvious brands, but high quality. That's what people wear to work. But it somehow isn't, is it? It's a league apart from that.
Yeah, I think it's not cool anymore to be ostentatious. Maybe 20 or 30 years ago, gold taps and things like that might have been more in place. I'm speculating here. I'm not from that background myself, but I watch a lot of property shows. I find them interesting, and the best houses of 2023. When you look inside them, they're granite worktops, they're maybe quartz worktops. They're huge, of course. They've got the big television. They've got the literal fireplace or the digital fireplace. They're not. You don't necessarily see these great big artworks and the gold everywhere that you might have seen in the past. I think it's cooler to just be more subtle about it. I would say, by the way, they do flaunt their wealth in Succession though, because they do it through private jets and things like that, but maybe not in how they dress.
Yeah, I mean, are you watching Succession, Mariana?
I'm not, but what I wanted to say is that we have this weekly meeting with my whole department every Monday, and we have someone in the team who watches Succession, and every single time without fail they'll say, have you watched the new episode? And I've never been interested in watching it until I've seen the articles that Sorcha send about the fashion. So I don't care about the plot and the betrayals, but I'm really into finding out more about how they're getting dressed, essentially.
Well, exactly. So I mean, they've obviously reflected something accurate, haven't they, in the zeitgeist about how extremely wealthy people, billionaires, are now slightly reluctant, perhaps, to boast about their wealth via their clothing. Do you recognize that as an accurate thing?
I don't think it matters. I think that Succession is fiction, and it reminds me a lot about this trilogy called The Crazy Rich Asians, where you're also looking at Singapore's 0.1%, like the ultra rich elites, and I think it's more of this idea of for us, it's just fascinating, some sort of mystery to know what kind of language and what kind of fashion they decide to use to communicate or to make a position. But at a certain point, I feel like I know that Succession has some experts on the team to make sure that they're accurately representing the ultra rich. But I think the fascination with it is that it's such an exclusive group that we would otherwise not have access to, and it's a way of learning more about it and sort of forgetting whether we're buying our clothes from Zara or Uniqlo, just to try to match the style.
I mean, those high street names are interesting, aren't they, Sorcha? Because what usually happens with fashion trends, especially ones started by high-profile influencers, is they filter down to the likes of you and me going to Zara and H&M to try and get something a bit like that. But by its very nature, Zara will not be able to do an imitation $500 cashmere baseball cap because the quality of the materials won't be there.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sort of my theory is, because when you watch these TikTok videos or YouTube videos, the people in these videos are not suggesting that you go out and buy these incredibly expensive brands because they know their audience can't afford it, or most of their audience won't be able to afford it. But it is, I think it's sort of, in this post-pandemic period where lots of these young people on social media, they're not going to be able to, kind of generate a huge amount of generational wealth. They don't even have wealth now, and we're sort of in this period of like financial struggle for a lot of people. And I think it's sort of buying into the idea that you can still look wealthy even if you can't really afford to is sort of really appealing, because I don't know, no one likes to think that they're sort of on the losing side or the losing team. They're the ones who have to kind of like deal with the after effects of all this sort of like huge turmoil that's gone on in the world. And I think that's maybe where it kind of comes from. And it is interesting that essentially you can never truly replicate these outfits because you're not supposed to be able to. You're not supposed to be able to. It isn't supposed to be the person on the street, and therefore, yeah, you do essentially get these cheap knockoffs of these incredibly expensive luxury brand, and it's all very ironic and a bit strange and a bit, double thinky.
And in this sort of digital world, Guy, where there are fashion bloggers out there and TikTokers who'll screen grab what people are wearing and analyse it, you sort of can't get away with stealth wealth, can you? I mean, I'm thinking about Rishi Sunak and his, whatever it was, £1,000 Prada suede shoes or whatever he was wearing to a factory visit. That was criticised at the time, but actually probably would have gone unnoticed 10 years ago. You'd expect the Prime Minister to be dressed in a nice suit. No one would be analysing exactly what those shoes were and where they came from. Whereas now people are like, look how rich he is. He's completely out of touch. Do you think it's incumbent on people in business to not do stealth wealth, to actually make sure, they're wearing nice clothes, but not clothes that cost thousands and thousands, because it means they're out of touch?
I think people should wear what they want and what they feel comfortable in. Personally, I think politicians are slightly different. We've had politicians, chancellors in the past getting criticised for having, a £15 burger the night before. I don't know if you remember this, the night before a budget about 10 years ago. I think might be George Osborne. And, whether it's fashion or burgers or anything else, politicians are often accused of being out of touch if they don't know the price of milk or bread or something like that. But going back to your question in terms of how people dress, it's up to them.
Well, is it up to them? Is it bad taste? If you're the boss of a company and you're firing people and people know your baseball cap costs $500, let's take this Kendall Roy example, is that just bad taste?
I don't think flaunting wealth is in good taste anymore. But what flaunting wealth looks like is different to different people. Personally, I wouldn't have a clue whether Rishi Sunak's shoes cost £2, £200, £2,000. I wouldn't have a clue what Kendall Roy's baseball cap cost. I certainly don't take offence to someone wearing a £500 baseball cap. I wouldn't have a clue that it costs £500. I think it's up to people to dress how they want, and I don't think we should begrudge people who have money from spending that money. And you know what? Sometimes you can't get away from it if you've got a posh brand. It's a posh brand. So what? They wear what they want. Let them be. As long as they're not doing any harm, as long as they're not degrading others, let them wear what they want.
It's a bit of a problem for the brands, though, isn't it, Mariana? If basically the brands where you display their logo are now all being put in the basket of, oh, that's naff. That's what people who want to be seen as rich wear, but it's not what really rich people wear. That could affect the bottom line, couldn't it, for a lot of these companies?
So on the rabbit hole of falling into TikTok content, there's been so much said about how designer and luxury brands will have different levels, like a hierarchy of content or not content, but a hierarchy of products that they put out that appeal to different people. So you would say like the sort of what they would consider new money, but not ultra rich, would be the people going for all the logos, and they'll have all this sort of content, all this collections that target these people. And then you'll have the more understated pieces that are even more expensive, but they're for a different sort of audience. So I think actually a lot of the interesting content that I've seen around it is about how different brands have been able to target those different audiences, and even places, brands like Michael Kors, who have specific cheaper or lower quality pieces that are just for outlet factories. And it's sort of like you're selling the idea that you're joining these more exclusive groups by buying into the brands, but they're being very smart about the way in which they're targeting either it's the logos or the patterns or the materials. But I think they fundamentally know and are aware that different people are looking for different things to get out of the brand, and you're buying into this idea, which is very aspirational in a way.
I was just thinking that there's also sort of an interesting, maybe only in the UK, but there's sort of this interesting like class. I mean, obviously a class element to it, but I feel like stealth wealth kind of applies to maybe more what we would call like nouveau riche, where it's kind of like whether or not that means they actually have generational wealth or not, it's kind of like the newly moneyed, it's still quite sleek business wear, although and then the kind of maybe truly wealthy or kind of landed gentry in the UK. Like, you might have the YSL jumper or any of these brands, but they're not new. They're worn in. Maybe they have holes. I read a Vogue article that said King Charles III's holy socks were an example of stealth wealth. And I guess it's
whilst he's wearing a gold crown.
Yeah, well, exactly. And so, can we really say a king is stealthily wealthy? I think he's quite ostentatiously wealthy.
Yeah, but there's still that element of like, oh, this thing, I've just chucked it on,
exactly,
which the aristocrats can do.
Yeah, like, if you can afford it, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about looking presentable because you're in this sort of like stratosphere that you'll always be in, and you can never really fall from. And so it's like fascinating to think of those sorts of dynamics as well.
Is it fun though, Mariana? That's the only thing that concerns me about this trend. I kind of think like, well, are we just basically saying that like wearing colours is gauche now? That can't last for long, because it is boring if everyone's wearing monochrome and grey to look, understated.
Okay, so I agree with this, especially on the idea of those, I don't know if you've seen the capsule wardrobes, where you just have like sort of very few basics and they're all a shade of neutral, and you just sort of mix them together and they say that it just matches. And then my brain just feels like they all look the same. But also, I feel like it's about people taking this a step further. So now I've seen the most eclectic capsule wardrobes where you put together things that you wouldn't even think would work, and they have patterns. But it's about what Sorcha was saying about it's still sustainable because it's just still a few pieces, and it still works. So and I think like brands like Max Mara, who have the very expensive, very tailored coats that everyone wants, now they make them in super bright colors, and then it just becomes an extra level. So I think it's not it's a trend in the sense that it's very big right now, but it's not a static one. So it'll just sort of keep evolving. So hopefully it will become fun for you as well, Olly.
Yes, well, thank you, Sorcha, for introducing me to the idea of quiet luxury. I think this £10 ET t-shirt from Gap that I'm wearing is probably underlying my interest in the subject. But here's fascinating. I have some new vocabulary. Thank you as well to Guy and to Mariana. You can follow this show for free. Don't get more quiet luxury than that. And get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts. Just tap follow. And you can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.co.uk/subscribe. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.